Makes his way to the right and is tripped up, reaching for the end zone. Touchdown. What a start.
Give it to Reed, and there he goes. Nobody's going to catch him. Touchdown.
It's caught. Jeremiah Smith. Touchdown, Ohio State. The legend grows.
This is Chasing the Natty, a college fantasy football podcast. All right, welcome in everyone. This is Jared Palmgren, host of the Chasing the Natty podcast. Hope you guys have a wonderful night on this Tuesday night. We are the College Fantasy Football Podcast on the Campus of Canton Podcast Network. You can find us in all of your podcast feeds and on YouTube every Monday morning and Tuesday night during the season. If you want to support the great work we do here, head on over to campusofcanton.com. Subscribe there with any of our phenomenal tiers. We got content ranging on all sorts of college football games, whether it is CFF, Devy, C2C, College IDP, College DFS, Underdog Best Balls. If you play it, then we've got content, whether that's tools, rankings, pretty much everything you need to succeed. In fact, right now, if you want to support the show even further, make sure when you sign up for one of our yearly membership tiers, use that promo code NATTY, N-A-T-T-Y, to get 10% off your yearly membership. Again, that is promo code NATTY, N-A-T-T-Y. If you can't do that, totally fine. Just show us some love by leaving a like, a comment, and subscribe on the YouTube side of things here as you're watching the stream right now. In fact, if you have not done so already, make sure you do that. And then on the podcast side of things, just leave a 5-star review. Make sure you're following the show. Not only does that show us support, but also supports the entire game of college fantasy football in general. If you have any further questions or want to get in touch for whatever reason, you can find me in the show on Twitter. I'm at CFF_Jared. The show is at Chasing the Natty. Guys, I am, again, sorry for the absence the last couple weeks. Sorry that we have not been able to do these live streams and start-sit shows and everything. You guys are, again, just absolute rock stars for being willing to be patient with us and everything. And, you know, obviously, if you want more details on my absence, you can go listen to this week's Waiver Wire show. I talked about it there a little bit. But again, I will reiterate to all of you guys out there that you guys, one, I appreciate your patience, but also two, like, not only just your understanding, but like your true support that you gave and everything. I really do feel the love from all of you guys, and you guys have been nothing but kind. And so I just want to thank you guys again for that. So with all that being said, again, those of you who might be joining us again who haven't been here at all this season, or maybe y'all just need a refresher. Basically, this is like a video version of some office hours where you guys can come in here, ask your start-sit questions. They don't have to be start-sit questions. They can be just general questions about college fantasy in general. And I am more than willing to discuss, but obviously the vast majority of what we'll talk about here today is going to be start-sit shows. If you are listening to this on the podcast version or video recording version later, like say tomorrow at, Wednesday when the podcast version comes out, one, appreciate you listening regardless, but at the same time, make sure you come hang out on Tuesday nights. It is a ton of fun. I appreciate the back and forth we can have with you guys in the chat. It is a ton of fun. With all that being said, I think I've said that 3 times. You guys can tell I'm out of practice in terms of how much I repeat things. Let's get started with the show. We got some great questions in the chat. A couple of you dropped them ahead of time. A couple of you are dropping them now, so we will get right to that. Let's start off with Mr. Dan's question here. Let me actually throw up on the screen here. There we go. Again, as always, we'll have the CFF weekly rankings over at campuscan.com and their projected PPR points for the week. We will also have the DraftKings not sponsored lines and the over-unders for the week here. We're using DraftKings this week. Again, we'll rotate week in and week out. We also have a couple of stats that we can quickly look up anytime we need it. We got the Fantrax page and everything, so lots of things for us to look up. Anyway, let's get to Dan's question. You guys can already see the question or the people we're discussing here up on the screen. I'll go ahead and throw the poll in the chat here as well. He is asking us to pick 2 running backs here, and that is between Mr. King Miller, the walk-on freshman running back out of USC, taking over for Wayman Jordan and Eli Sanders over there. He is facing Notre Dame this week. We also have Gavin Sawchuk at Stanford this week. And then we got Kavorian Barnes versus Baylor this week. So I think I am going to... The way I thought about this was, one, I think you have to start Miller no matter what. There's pretty much nobody else in that backfield. Brian Jackson's back there, but as we saw last week, that it is very, very clear who Lincoln Riley is very comfortable with taking on the vast majority of carries here. Like as soon as both Sanders and Jordan went down, like Miller was that guy. He'll once again be the guy against Notre Dame this week. And so I say he's must start. Yes, Notre Dame, I think, is top 25 against the run. Top 25, number 23, only allowing about 100 rushing yards per game. I still think that just because of pure volume, you'll still have a good time there. And then I think, if I remember correctly, Notre Dame, this is expected to be a relatively high scoring game here. USC only an 8.5 point dog. There will be some touchdowns to be had on the USC side of things. So I think Miller is a very good bet to find a couple of those. And then that really leaves Kavorian Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk, two guys that, is not, neither one of them have become like a true workhorse. Obviously, Barnes has definitely been a bit more of that recently, versus Sawchuk. The lead back for Florida State, but not quite by any means workhorse back. In fact, he is pretty much splitting carries with Tommy Castellanos in terms of leading that rushing, and Chroma's only about 20 carries behind him. So to me, then this relies on matchup, and when I look that up, our projections have them pretty close at 12.65 for Sawchuk and Barnes at 12.10. But when you look at the matchups here, against the run, as you will see here, Stanford surprisingly pretty stout against the run, 114.7 rushing yards given up per game. I do think that's partially because of the competition that Stanford has faced so far, but at the same time, it is like we're halfway through the season. There's enough data there to suggest that Stanford's at least pretty solid against the run. Meanwhile, Baylor's defense, good Lord, giving up almost 200 yards per game. Do I think that we're looking at like a true workhorse with Kavorian Barnes here? Probably not, but he's definitely the lead back for TCU whenever he is healthy. And so I'm willing to bet on that. And, a poor deep rushing defense here combined with that, I would start Barnes and Miller and sit Sawchuk out of those two. So curious what the chat has to say. Not enough votes on this poll, but it is an even split between Miller and Barnes. Again, between those two, actually, that's super interesting because I said sit Sawchuk. So, Dan, you can take what the chat says, or you can take what I say. The projections say start Miller and Sawchuk. I say Miller and Barnes. The chat says start Sawchuk, and then a 50-50 between Barnes and Miller. So we'll have to see where we go from there. Let's move on to David's question here. And he is asking us as well between three wide receivers here. He's on a 4-game winning streak, which congratulations, David. Glad I'm sure we've helped you with that. So I feel good about that, considering I know you're a regular here every single week. But he's asking us between Malachi Tony, who's going up against Louisville this week. We got Chris Brazzell, who had a very, very disappointing week last week against Arkansas there, and then Trent Walker versus... Who's Trent Walker playing? Lafayette. So FCS competition there. And let's see, did he put whether this was full PPR? He did not. That would kind of change my opinion a little bit. Although you can see here the projections have all these guys relatively close. Malachi Tony, wide receiver 14, at 16.4 fantasy points. And then Brazzell and Walker very close there, about a half a point apart from each other. Brazzell had a pretty quiet game last week. I think he rebounds this week. Again, Alabama's, defense is, especially in the first half, not very great. And so I think, Brazzell is able to pop off a big play or two there. I don't think he goes full quiet after the great couple of games that he had there. So I would start Brazzell pretty comfortably. And then Miami at Florida, Miami at Florida. Miami at Louisville. I know both those defenses have been decently solid. I'm curious to see what the over-under in that game is. Here we go. Over under 51.5. So not great. And then as Brett points out in the chat, Trent Walker is a little banged up right now. I think that was part of the reason why Trent Walker didn't perform super well last week. If I remember correctly, I think he exited the game early. Wide receiver. Yeah, you got the injury flag there as well. Again, a little banged up. 9 targets, 2 catches. It is an FCS opponent, but that also, to me, provides a very good opportunity for them to just let Trent sit for the week and go from there. Meanwhile, Brazil, Tony, 2 clear wide receiver ones for their respective teams. Although, again, Brazil had a quiet week last week. I think he bounces back in a good way. And then Tony's going to be a big part of that Miami team. If this is full PPR, I'd feel very good about Tony and Brazil. And you just go from there, David. So, let's move on from here. Brett continuing to point out that Trent Walker gotten the crap beat out of him the last couple of weeks. Let's go with Justin's question here. He is asking between 2 guys here, full PPR, Will Pauling versus Notre Dame or Will Pauling at Notre Dame versus USC this week, or we can go Kewan Lacey versus Georgia. And, my immediate thought is, and the projections are bearing this out, I would go Lacey pretty easily. And, Justin, I have a feeling you put this question here just to make me go against my dogs here for a second. But Lacey, man, like Georgia, if the trends continue here, he's gonna Lacey has an opportunity to get a lot of points in that first half, because the first half defense for Georgia has just not been great at all. Right? So there's definitely opportunity. This is not one of those scenarios where you just see going up against Georgia, must sit him. We're not in those 2021, 2022 defenses right now. There's plenty of opportunity for him to score. Meanwhile, Will Pauling, let me take a look at Notre Dame. I don't even think he's top 2 at Notre Dame right now in terms of targets. Might be wrong about that. Yeah, top 4. Yeah, he 20 targets in 6 games. I know it's full PPR, but Lacey's gotten himself a couple of receptions, right? Like, off the top of my head. Let's see. Okay, not as much, but 16 receptions in 6 games, right? Like, that's on pace for a 30 reception season for him. He's getting plenty of receptions over there to go along with his rushing. I think, personally, Justin, I think we're overthinking this. I think just go with Lacey. I know it's UJ's defense, but he'll get his points in the first half at the very least. We'll see what happens in the second half. So, up next, Andrew Bursey says, "Hey Jared, seems like I'm always asking about running backs. Totally fine. Love talking about running backs. Who would you go with this week? Choose one out of Komafele, the running back out of Northwestern, going up against Purdue. A very sneaky, I'm not going to say volume pig, but a guy that is like kind of doing sneakily well for a team that really nobody really pays attention to with Northwestern there. We also got Maccabee in the same game there, Devin Maccabee going up against Northwestern. Or do we go Turbo Richard versus UConn? UConn is 12th nationally. Oh, God. Where'd that yawn come from? And he points out that UConn's 12th nationally against the run. But let's take a look at UConn's schedule so far. Again, UConn performing very well this season, right? I'm not gonna say they're a bad team or anything like that, but majority of their schedule has been FCS opponent, Syracuse, Delaware, Ball State, Buffalo, Florida International. A lot of teams that have not been able to really run the ball very well this season. I'm curious to see what they're able to do against Syracuse here. Okay, held Yacine Willis down a bit, but, still a decent day for him. That was also a game where Syracuse's offense just could not get anything going, which was very strange. And then I'm curious, again, this game against Buffalo, they were able to hold them down a little bit as well. But theoretically, we should still be seeing Turbo Richard have one of his better games here against UConn. So I'm not as worried about that. I'm curious to see what the projections have him. Okay, they have him at RB33, 14-ish fantasy points. That's kind of roughly what I'm expecting, but let's see what the rest of these guys. Kama Lefay, not much lower, but lower positional rank-wise, but not as much in terms of pointage. You're talking about just under 2 points less there. And then Maccabee is the next guy up there at 13.27 fantasy points. Let's take a look at the rushing defenses here, right? As you pointed out, like UConn doing very, very well. Or maybe not so much. Maybe not so much, actually, because according to teamrankings.com here, they are, I'm just double checking to make sure I'm not looking at passing. Yeah, no, opponent rushing yards per game, UConn is 83rd, so below average. So they're giving up about 161 rushing yards per game. Maybe, again, you might be looking at the running back ranking that Van Tranks gives out and everything, but they're giving up plenty of rushing yards here. So definitely something to keep an eye out there when it comes to Richard. Meanwhile, let's take a look at Purdue. I don't think they're doing, well, 51st, so about average. And then Northwestern, 82nd. So these guys are all right next to each other in the rankings. It seems like Purdue has the best rushing defense, so that probably takes out Como Fele. Also add in the fact that that's not usually a very good offense for the most part, so easy sit there. That leaves Richard versus Maccabee. You don't put whether or not this is PPR or not, so I will say this. If it's PPR, I would go Richard. If it's non-PPR, I would go Maccabee. A long-winded answer for all that, so my apologies. You have the yawning tonight. I'm not sure what's going on here. I'm not gonna ignore you, Andrew. But okay, so half PPR. Okay, so right in the middle. Dadgummit, right in the middle. Hello, Rishi. Half PPR. Where do I go with that? That's not what I wanted to hear at all. You know what? Let me just double check these two guys real quick. So Turbo, how many receptions does he have so far this year? He is up to 18 receptions versus Maccabee. Because I remember Maccabee being pretty good out of the backfield as well. 14 receptions. We'll just break the tie. We'll go with Richard just because he has a couple more receptions. I don't think there's going to be that much of a difference between those two. And I'd rather go with the P4 matchup versus a good G5 matchup there. So, all right. Next one comes to us from Amphibious Angler, a.k.a. Frog Fans Alt account. He says, it is between Kevin Coleman going against Auburn or Denzel Boston versus Michigan. As we saw last week, Michigan, not quite the defense that we've come to expect over the last couple of years. Let's start off with where the projections have it. So we got Kevin Coleman going up against Auburn, 14 fantasy points, wide receiver 37 on the week. And then we have Denzel Boston, wide receiver 18 on the week. So I think I'm kind of in agreement here. Coleman, I put out an article recently where I put an article out recently about like wide receivers that are due, and one of the guys that I almost put on that list is Kevin Coleman. He is leading this Missouri wide receiver room in terms of targets, and so yeah, and he hasn't really scored a lot of touchdowns. And I don't think has he scored any touchdowns this year. He has scored one. But again, one touchdown on 46 targets. That feels like it's going to bounce back at some point. Going up against Auburn this week. Again, Auburn team that could be either reeling from last week's game against Georgia or, a bounce back week this week. Very, very wide variety of things that can happen in that game. And if they choose the reeling route, Kevin Coleman absolutely could be in line for a good touchdown or two. Meanwhile, Denzel Boston going up against Michigan, passing wise, I think Michigan a little bit. Oh, that's Western Michigan. I was about to say, I'm like, whew, never mind. Yeah, here we go. Michigan 50th, giving up 216 passing yards per game. That's plenty for Denzel to kind of feed off in this game. I think the safe play is Boston. I think if you want to go for the ceiling play, and I forget, did you say if this was full PPR or not? You did not. So I'm going to say full PPR. Let's go with the slot wide receiver that's probably going to get a few more targets against Auburn. If it's non-PPR, let's go for the big play threat in Denzel Boston here. So, yeah. All right, just double checking the chat. Make sure I'm not hearing anything. Okay. So half PPR again. Why y'all doing half PPRs? Why are we not going extreme on either end? I'm joking. I I think half PPR, I'll still go with Boston as the big play threat, right? Because like even half PPR, you're not benefiting from that higher volume as much. So, next question here comes to us from Micah Bryant. He says, "Welcome back, Jared." Thank you, Micah. Start Pefele Ashlock against Colorado State or Cortez Braum versus UAB. One of my favorite players ever, Pefele Ashlock, and his absolute just Jekyll and Hyde performance that he is able to put together every single week. He's getting his targets every single week, but again, he's still so inefficient. Again, 72 targets in 7 games is great, obviously, but 10 yards per reception. He got 6 touchdowns so far this year, which is definitely an improvement, but so much of that is him scoring in bunches, it feels like. Yeah, 3 touchdowns this past week, 2 5 weeks before against Sam Houston, and 3 straight games of 0 yards where he didn't hit above 70 yards. It's just absolutely insane to me how unreliable he is. But the good news is that in terms of this matchup, he's going up against a guy in Cortez Braum that has also been just a little Jekyll and Hyde-ish recently, and definitely has nowhere near the targets that Pefele Ashlock does. But what he does have is efficiency, and quite clearly a favorite in terms of the red zone for Brendan Lewis. Obviously comes over with Brendan Lewis from Nevada to Memphis here, and he scored 5 touchdowns on the year, 17 yards per reception. So let's see, I forget, did you say half PPR or not? You did not. So let me know, Mike, if you're still listening, if you are going to go after. Oh, nope, never mind. You did say full point PPR. Dadgummit, that helps out Ashlock a lot. You know what? Let's go with, let's take a look and see what the projections have to say. Projections do like Ashlock. I have a feeling they're not going to love Braum as much. No, they do not. Wide receiver 49, but not a huge gap in point totals here. UAB's a mess. They just fired Trent Dilfer. That defense could be an absolute wreck this week. I would say go with Cortez Braum and just avoid the Jekyll and Hyde-ish nature of Pefele Ashlock. But that's just me being biased there. I'm not going to lie. So, yeah. I hope that answers your question, Micah. Let's move on. Let's see. Next question here. Andrew Welch says, I can't remember if I heard it listening to you or I heard it from Bainbridge elsewhere, but what do you think happened to the fall camp hype for Justin Bowick and to a lesser extent, Chris Marshall? Are we talking? Bowick's doing decent, I thought, in terms of like touchdowns, right? Like, that's because I remember looking at this for my article on touchdown regression positively. And yeah, Justin Bowick was a guy that stood out to me in terms of the number of touchdowns that he has. Yeah, he's 4 touchdowns versus their leading receiver, Beatty, is 2 touchdowns on 49 targets versus Bowick has 4 touchdowns on 18 targets. So Bowick's doing fine. But in terms of what happened to it, I think it's something we have to be a little careful of is we have to remember these G5 to Power 4 transfers a lot of times. We have to take that hype with a grain of salt. The Chris Marshall hype is definitely a weird one, but again, it's just something we see every single year, right? Where beat reporters either take a nugget of info they're able to grab and kind of expound on it from there. And then like Illinois was just weird because it felt like they were hyping up everybody but Hank Beatty in terms of being like that guy for Illinois this year. Like talk about Bowick, talk about Clement, and then now Beatty comes out as the slot wide receiver and is tearing it up for the Illini this year. So yeah, I in terms of what happened, I think Bowick was one of those things where he's performing well in practice doesn't mean that he's in the starting lineup. And then Marshall, probably, it seems like we've had hype about Marshall for a while, and there's always guys that kind of show up in practice but never really show it out on the field. So I think that's what happened there. Andrew says, I got baited into a very late round Kyle Tolliver picking best ball because that MCU beat writers were saying that he was the clear number 1 in the backfield. Again, as much as we love these beat writers, and as much as we do rely on them for good reporting, like, they just straight get things wrong sometimes, and they are relying on a lot of times as much information as we are because the coaches legitimately won't let them watch practice. So let's move on to Chris L's question here. He says, full PPR, sit one between Darius Taylor, Minnesota versus Nebraska, Emmett Johnson, Nebraska versus Minnesota, or Robert Henry, UTSA versus North Texas. Brother, I love Darius Taylor. What we've seen the last couple of weeks has not been, clinical Darius Taylor. And I can't remember exactly where I put him on the freakout scale for this week's waiver wire show, but it was enough to where I was like, one, looking for a backup plan, and I would say sit him when you got two studs here in Robert Henry and Emmett Johnson. Like, we're talking about, let's see, Robert Henry, running back 2 on the year, Emmett Johnson, running back 5 on the year. You don't sit either one of those guys for Darius Taylor. I know he's the PJ Fleck RB1. He got his clear workload last week. He's still so injured. His efficiency has been terrible. I think he had like less than 2 yards per carry versus Ohio State. Fine, makes sense. What was far more worrying to me was him getting 14 carries and 3.2 yards per carry against Purdue. Right, until I see a good performance from Taylor, he's riding my bench for right now, especially when you got two studs like that. I wouldn't overthink it, Chris. Looking at some recent comments here. Brett says, Jared is totally right. I love hearing that. That's always great. It's getting harder and harder to predict stuff, even heading out of camp in the fall season. Yeah, exactly. Right. It is so hard. Let's see. More comments. Jeff Hodak, you are up next. I lost your question here. There we go. Found it. He says, who would you start? Wide receiver DeMarcus Lacey from Marshall versus Texas State, or Cade Harris from Air Force versus Wyoming. This is an interesting one. Again, Jeff, if you're still on, if you could drop me whether this is PPR or not, because that'll definitely, like, if it's PPR, that's going to help Lacey out a ton. He's got great volume so far. Air Force is good at sitting productive players. No, for real. Again, Air Force is so annoying in terms of their use every single week. Lacey was in the tent last game. Yeah, again, Marshall. Again, I'll go ahead and answer a question I know we get a little bit later. I'm trying to see if I can find who asked it. Somebody asked about Michael Allen and what's going on there. Yeah, Rishi Patel asks, would you be worried at all about Michael Allen getting out carry last game? It's super weird. Like, getting information out of Marshall is very hard right now because people are you're not the first Rishi to ask him about Michael Allen and him getting out carry last week. I don't know if y'all noticed, if you had Michael Allen last week, you would definitely notice if you're watching his fantasy production. It was going up, and it just stopped at one point. That tells me one of two things. Either Allen got hurt and he was out the rest of the game and we just still don't have information on Fantrax about that, or they took him out to rest him the rest of the game, and then their backup running back there, Antoine Roberts, took over from there. They were already blowing out Old Dominion, so it's like one of those cases of like, okay, do we even risk Michael Allen here going forward? And so I think that's a tough call to kind of figure out what's going on in terms of what to do with Michael Allen. And then, sorry, that was kind of a sidetrack and we bring it back to Lacey here in terms of whether or not to start him over Cade Harris. I mean, again, if we look at the rankings so far, Cade Harris is a top, let's see. Yeah, he's top 5 wide receiver in CFF this year, which is wild because they're treating him as a running back a lot of times this year. But that's just what he is on Fantrax. So I would continue riding with Cade Harris if you're even worried about, if you're even remotely worried about like what's going on with Lacey and that like him getting injured last week. He could very well be fine. But again, Harris is an absolute stud, and Lacey, again, wide receiver 34, he'll rise up. He'll continue to be a stud as long as he's healthy. But right now, I would just keep riding Cade Harris. And if Air Force does what Air Force does, I don't think you can hate yourself for starting a top 5 wide receiver right now. Next question to us comes from Tyler. He also asked about Michael Allen, full point PPR league here. Allen's going up against Texas State, as we said before. Lewis Bond's going up against UConn. Ja'Cory Thomas out of Old Dominion going up against James Madison. Let me take a look at Old Dominion here. That's a team I consistently forget to kind of keep an eye on. Thomas, very efficient, but 39 targets through 6 games. We're not getting elite volume here by any stretch of the imagination. It is full PPR, but I think I would sit Thomas pretty easily. That leads us between Michael Allen, who's going to get the rushing production, but also get a little bit of receiving production there as well. Kind of get the benefits from the PPR. Then Lewis Bond, absolute monster volume-wise, just has not found the end zone. I think, Tyler, that you go with Bond here. I think this is the week where he finally finds the end zone. He's getting 10 targets a game right now. It is just, the volume's absolutely insane for him right now. It's just a crime he hasn't found the end zone. So let's take a look at projections. Projections very close with these two, but I think with Allen might having some kind of injury concern there, just start Bond against UConn. He'll be fine. So let's see. Next question here. We already talked about Rishi asking about Michael Allen here. Let's see. Trying to find. Sorry, y'all. I'm just trying to find. Going through the chat and everything, seeing if I can make sure I don't miss any questions. Oh, Micah says thanks. And as Georgia fans, do we clap like Kirby now? Yeah, we'll clap like Kirby. Everybody give a round of applause. Let's see. I can't find a question. Oh, there we go. Adam. Found a question from Adam. He says, need one quarterback here. Taylor Green versus Texas A&M. Mestamaker versus UTSA. Maava versus Notre Dame. 4-point passing touchdowns. A lot of us keep waiting for that other shoe to drop when it comes to Taylor Green after the pitiful SEC play that he put on last season. But something I think people forget was that Jaden Daniels performed well his first year in the SEC, performed well his first year at LSU, but also had that same problem of once he got into conference play, things kind of fell apart and he wasn't nearly as startable. And then he took off the next year. Taylor Green's kind of on a similar path right now. And, Texas A&M definitely going to be one of the more challenging opponents that he will face so far, and so I do worry about that a little bit. Messamaker, I think you need to sit him until they get this whole touchdown thing figured out, where they're only allotting him 1 or 2 touchdowns a week. So I think he's an easy sit until they get that figured out. Projections say Maava, but because this is 4-point passing touchdowns, I think you still got to go with Green and his rushing ability. Just ride the guy that is currently, let's see, I think quarterback 2 or 3 on, quarterback 2 on the year. Maava obviously doing very well at QB 16. He might be a safer play. I guess it depends on how you personally handle things, Adam. I guess this is, a good opportunity to kind of talk about my mindset a little bit. When I'm already doing well in a league, like say I'm in the top 2 or 3 in a league, I do tend to play a little bit more conservative, just kind of go with the safer options. If I'm on the bubble and I need to get into the playoff, right, I'm willing to take more risks. So I guess depending on where you're at, Adam, if you're doing well in your league, which I assume you are because you listen to this show, I would say go with Maava against Notre Dame this weekend. Again, expect to be a high-scoring game. He should be fine. Maybe doesn't hit 35 fantasy points this week, but I think he's a better chance to get. He's a better chance to get you to 25 versus Green. Any game possible right now, he could hit 35 fantasy points and you could be golden, or he could end the day with 15-20 because A&M's just a legitimately good defense. But if you got a good enough team, you can stomach that hit, right? Yeah, you say you're in second right now. Awesome. Glad to hear it, man. And that, if that's the case, I would just go with Maava and play the safe play. So, all right, let's hear this out. Next question here. Ivan Idrelin, I hope I pronounced that right. I assume I did not, so my apologies there. He says, for your flex spot, I love flex questions. Malachi Toney or Caleb Komolafe. It's a Power 4 only conference league with full PPR. Full PPR, I think you got to go. I think you got to go with Toney there. He's going to get fed. It's a conference matchup against Louisville there. Meanwhile, Komolafe going up against Purdue. I don't really trust that Northwestern offense nearly as much as I do that Miami offense. So I think you just go with Toney there. But, because we have the projections here, let's go ahead and see what they have to say. And yeah, they see a pretty sizable gap here as well, with Toney at about 16.4 fantasy points and then Komolafe at 12.5. I would tend to agree with those. And then again, just looking at the matchup here as well. Yeah, 51.5, not a great spread, but Miami's favored by 2 touchdowns. So if you take, if you calculate the team total from that, you're looking at about 32-ish fantasy or 32-ish points for Miami. That's 4 touchdowns. I would feel pretty good about Malachi Toney being one of those. Rishi has a question, and like an actual start-sit question. So let's take a look at that. He is so building on that Michael Allen question, he says Caleb Hawkins versus UTSA, Michael Allen versus Texas State, and Denzel Boston versus Michigan. Which 2 would you start? One would be at the running back spot, the other at flex. I think you got 2 studs in Hawkins and Boston, and you can just feel pretty good about their health situation versus Allen. Like Allen, if he's fully healthy, he's a stud. But if you're kind of trying to be risk averse right now, Rishi, I would say just don't even worry about Allen. Go with Hawkins. Go with Denzel here. Let's take a look to see what the projections have to say, just in case you're curious. Yeah, it looks like Boston definitely over Hawkins. And then really the main question is, what do we do with Michael Allen? Michael Allen at 14.12 fantasy points. So yeah, even our projections, like even if he plays, our projections aren't loving him compared to the other 2. And then him having that extra potential of being out because of injury, I think you just play it safe and go with Boston and go with Hawkins. All right. Any more questions here? Yvonne, I got your question already. And there we go. Yeah, we're currently caught up on questions here, y'all. So again, appreciate it. And because of that, for the first time, if you have more start-sit questions, and Tyler's taking advantage. If you have more start-sit questions, I'm willing to answer those just because we do have a little bit more time. But also, again, I have other things that, like, if you guys want to talk about, y'all can update me on. I do have believe it or not, I do have the South Alabama, Arkansas State game on my phone. I did see that South Alabama scored a touchdown because somebody in the chat let me know who scored that touchdown because I completely missed it. I was answering questions. We got a couple more questions in the chat, though. We will get to Miss Rev 42 here. Rest in peace, Rev, for the Aggie fans out there. Anyway, pick 2 full PPR here. Bo Sparks versus Marshall, Mario Craver versus Arkansas, or Chase Hendricks versus NIU. Oh, Kentrell Bullock scored a touchdown. Hell yeah, I got a ton of Bullock shares out there tonight. So Miss Rev, you're going with Sparks, who has cooled off a ton since his very, very hot start. Scoring 4 touchdowns in that first week. I don't think he's scored a touchdown since. Am I correct in that? Like, it has been, he's had the production, he's had the volume, but I don't think he's really had much going for him since then. Okay, yeah, 1 touchdown the week after, and then 0 touchdowns from then on out. So definitely rough for Sparks. Could be that he's due for one. He's still getting volume every single week. You got Craver going up against Arkansas. I think there's no way you can sit Craver. He's a top 5 wide receiver for CFF, or top 10 at the very least. Let's see. Craver, okay, top 10. He's wide receiver 9 right now. So yeah, top 10 wide receiver going up against an Arkansas defense that's giving up a ton of plays in the secondary. I don't think there's any way you can sit Craver. And then Hendricks is really the main question here. He gets a ton of, projections love him, and makes sense. His volume's absolutely insane in a full PPR league. I don't think you can really ignore that. But Northern Illinois, their offense sucks. They don't score a ton of points, but their defense has been pretty solid as well. Let me see exactly where they rank. Yeah, their defense in the passing game has been really solid this season. 169 passing yards given up per game. So that's definitely something to be concerned about there. Versus, Bo Sparks is going up against, let's see, Marshall. I don't recall Marshall. Yeah, 120th, giving up almost 300 yards per week. That's real tough. That's real tough. I'm not going to lie. Yeah, again, Craver must start. Sparks and Hendricks, that's real tough. Let me think about this for a second. Because, again, I think Hendricks has the better volume between the two, right? Because Sparks, we're looking at 17, 30, 31, 40, 48, 55 targets in 6 games there versus Hendricks. I think, has just been out of his mind when it comes to his volume. Yeah, so we got, 21, 26, 38, 44. Okay, not as big of a difference between the two. I mean, obviously, Hendricks' volume's been great, and his production's been great, and his touchdowns have been pretty consistent. But I think then because of that, I will go with Sparks going up against the much worse secondary there. So Craver and Sparks, hard to sit Hendricks. I would try to see Miss Rev if you could find a way to get all 3 into your lineup. Otherwise, totally understandable. Like that's 3 good starting options you have there. Real quick, Tyler, I'll get to your question here in a second. Rishi says, I have a team building question, if that's okay. Rishi, this is a office hours Q&A place. Feel free to ask your this is totally fine to ask a team building question here. I'm totally down for that. But first, we'll get to Tyler's second question here. It says, Brendan Lewis at UAB or Del Rio Wilson versus Texas State. Oh, man, that's 2 guys that have been performing real well. I know Brendan Lewis is in the top 10 for CFF quarterbacks this year so far. Del Rio Wilson has just been absolutely on fire recently. Projections have them ridiculously close, 0.07 apart. I legitimately don't think that there's a bad option between these two. Oh God, that is so tough. Let's take a look at their matchups here. Del Rio Wilson going up against Texas State. Let's see where they rank. 108th against the pass, so he should perform pretty well against that. And then you have Lewis going up against UAB, who I think legitimately might be worse. Actually, not as bad as I thought. 223.6. Let's keep this simple. I think we just go Del Rio Wilson. He's been on an absolute hot streak recently. Let me take a look at his last couple of games. I don't think he's had really a bad game recently. Yeah, 24, 34, 30, 37. Let's keep riding that hot streak against another bad defense here. Let's just go with that. But again, I legitimately don't think that there's a bad question between those two. Yvonne says, appreciate all your content. Look forward to it every week. As a guy who got into college fantasy 2 years ago, you have been a big help. Appreciate all your videos every year. Yvonne, I appreciate you listening, man. Again, I appreciate all of you guys tuning in every single week. Let's see. Risha says, this question's too late, too many players, but between Reed, Caleb Hawkins, Owens, Bullock, which 2 would you have started this week? I would have gone Reed and Bullock this week. Those would have been my 2. Let's see. Rishi says, this might be a hot take, but CFB fantasy greater than NFL fantasy. Yeah, no, there's no argument from me, Rishi. Yeah, Miss Rev says, thanks, Jared. Messer is my lock. Yeah, if you got Messer, yeah, I understand why you're having to sit a stud now, because yeah, I would just sit the guy who's going up against the worst matchup this week. Let's see. Miss Rev said, thoughts on outlook for Caden Creel? Love Caden Creel. I think that he is probably one of my favorite waiver wire pickups for this week, just because that rushing floor is just absolutely insane every single week. It's going to be him and Cam Cook every single play for Jacksonville State going forward. They clearly figured something out between those two. Very much reminiscent of what that team was doing with Tyler Huff and Trey Stewart last year. Obviously not the same staff, but that's a team that wants to run the ball. So I like Caden Creel quite a bit. Outside of Heinz Shell, the Pittsburgh quarterback, I would say he's my second favorite quarterback I would have picked up. Rishi says, I wish I started Bullock. Hate Tuesday night games. Bro, I totally get it. You know what's okay, this is off topic here, but a pet peeve of mine with Fantrax, and don't get me wrong, love Fantrax, love what they do and everything, but their auto sub tool, super great, love that they incorporated it, but a pet peeve of mine in a huge way is the fact that I have Power 4 only leagues. Like my league that I started at my workplace this year is a Power 4 only league, and we still have to set start sits and set auto subs on Tuesday nights, even though Power 4 games don't start until Friday. It is super annoying, in my opinion, that is something we have to deal with. I keep saying that the auto sub feature should just be the same as being able to move them, which is just have it lock for individual players as their game starts. I think that, people say like, oh, there's a way to exploit that. Maybe not. I don't know. I feel bad for people having to like have their whole lineup set Tuesday nights when there's so much that can change between Tuesday and Saturday. So we'll see if we can eventually get them to change that. Moving on to David's next question here. He says, Ruben Owens or Nate Shepard, half-point PPR? I think you got to go Ruben Owens. Le'Veon Moss sounds like he'll be out for a bit. And Nate Shepard, while he's been very impressive for Duke so far, but I would say that, I would say Nate, or actually, who is Duke facing this week? Because like my thought is here that Ruben Owens probably going to get a workhorse load here, going up against a sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Give me a second, y'all. Yeah, Ruben Owens going up against Arkansas's defense is just a match made in heaven, especially with Le'Veon Moss being out. That is absolutely going to be a great combo of volume and probably good efficiency. Meanwhile, Nate Shepard, pretty good matchup here, obviously against short attack. Duke favored by 1.5 here, over under 61.5. I think there's a good shot that Shepard will score in this game. I would still go with Owens because I think he'll end up being the volume play. Let's plug this into the projections real quick, see where we are at with that. Yeah, they have Shepard ahead by Owens by about 0.6 fantasy points, but I do wonder, maybe I'll bring this up with Mox later, I do wonder if this is, if Owens is being accounted for as a potential workhorse back for this week. A couple more comments. Rishi says, love what Fantrax does, but not a fan of their newer updates like the projections and stuff. Seems like it's trying to mimic NFL, mimic ESPN NFL fantasy. I have zero problem with Fantrax pushing projections. In fact, I do kind of like that. Again, you have that little, it's a fun way to kind of interact and stuff. Obviously, you can't rely on the projections. My big pet peeve was for the longest time when you go to the players tab, it would auto default to, like, when you go to the players tab, it would auto default to projected per game going forward. And I do think that hurts people in terms of, like, it kind of gives a false idea that this is, like, what they're doing or what they're, like, at the same, like, again, I'm not trying to knock them because, again, like, everybody does projections and everybody does projections their own way. But we have to remember at the end of the day, they are projections and they are a best guess of what is going to happen. And kind of putting them front and center when you go to the players tab definitely makes it seem like that, you are, like, it makes them seem like they're more reliable than they actually are, versus like putting guys up in terms of their year-to-date production. I think would just, like, having that be automatic should still be the thing. There is a way to change that though. If you go to team and you go to settings here, I'll put it up on the screen for everybody. If you go to general, and then when you go down to your players tab right here, you can change that default time frame, right? So like right now it's projected weekly. You can change it down to year to date. So if that is something that annoys you, you can change it. I just wish still that they made it the default regardless. And then Tyler says, my pet peeve with it is that you can't make a lineup change if you're deciding between two guys without losing the priority of the other guy. Again, I agree. As long as the player hasn't started their game, I think you should still be able to change priorities from there. So, David says Duke is playing, Duke's playing Detective. I was answering a question I had earlier. Rishi says running backs Reed, Bullock, Hawkins, Michael Allen. Jeez Louise. Any suggestions on trades? Okay, so that's the question. Looking to flip two or one of Reed, Hawkins, or Allen. In terms of guys that I would trade away, I mean, is it Rishi? Is this a Rishi? Is this a dynasty league or is this a dynasty league or just a redraft league? Because that'll change my mindset a little bit on that. Because if it's a dynasty league, and if these are, it really wholly depends on, are you competing? Are you not competing? If this is a redraft league, he said I want to upgrade at tight end mainly. This is a redraft league. Okay, so let's think about this then. You could try not to keep the dead air, but I do kind of need to think about this here. This is a tough one. Let me take a look where some of these guys lie. So Hurst, I think you'll have a hard time trading Hurst. Yeah, he's wide receiver 39 on the year. Vander Ross. If you're trying to get a tight end, I would say, trading a lesser wide receiver to help people. I think Snow would be a good option, right? Because he's been very up and down in his performances, and he's scored a lot of points recently, so you can kind of ride off that high a little bit and hope that people think he's going to do that towards the end of the year. I don't necessarily think that's exactly what's going to happen with Snow. I think he's been very touchdown dependent lately, so maybe you can get somebody to bite on that. I wouldn't trade Bell. I think he's coming into his own. Denzel, Vander Ross, I would keep. Hurst is another guy that you might be able to flip for like a higher upside tight end, but maybe not as one that's reliable. Running backs, I don't think you're going to get anybody to buy on K'Jon Owens, even though, again, he is doing obviously pretty well right now. Might be able to get somebody to buy on Hawkins. Reed and Bullock, I would not trade for a tight end. Just straight up. So that's just kind of my thought on that. More questions here. I saw B. Johnstone. I saw you started a question, so I assume you'll get one back here in a second. And then Dynasty Central Hockey says, pick one, Jared, please. Thank you. Liam Zarka, Air Force versus Wyoming, or Mike Alejado at Colorado State. 6 point any touchdown. Dude, Sarka's just been on a roll. You can't sit him. Just straight up. Like he didn't start the year, and he's already quarterback 3. Like, he has absolutely shot up in rankings. Like, if I go over here on my little spreadsheet here, you can see that he didn't start until week 5 and jumped up to become, or no, he didn't start until week 4 and jumped up to be top 3 by week 7. Just absolutely insane what he's been able to do so far. Meanwhile, Alejado a little bit more up and down. Let me see, where is actually Alejado right now? Quarterback 101. Yeah, I know he missed a couple of games. And let me see where he's at in fantasy points per game. Yeah, quarterback 51. Yeah, you can't sit a top 3 quarterback for Alejado. The matchup might be a little bit better there with Colorado State, but you just got to keep riding with Zarka. Let's see. John B. Stone says need 3 running backs, 1 PPR here. And he says Ruben Owens versus Arkansas, Wisner versus Kentucky, Kendrick Raphael versus UNC, Cobb versus Missouri, or Price versus USC. Owens and Wisner, I think, are must starts there. They're clear RB1s for their teams. That leaves Raphael, Cobb, or USC. I'm going to plug those 3 into projections here. We can kind of go from there. Raphael, in terms of volume, seems like a safe bet. And again, going up against the North Carolina defense, should be able to put up some points. But the problem is he is so inefficient. And so we got Jeremiah Cobb, projections like him a little bit better. And then, Jadarian Price has been really, really solid this season. I think he's pretty up here. And yeah, there he is, like RB26 on the year. You might roll with him because I don't think USC's rushing defense is really all that so far. Oh, never mind. I say that they're giving up only about 100 yards in rushing total per game. Obviously, that can change with Notre Dame. A much better rushing attack than USC's probably used to facing at this point. But projections like Price the best. I would just roll with Price and hope that he falls into the end zone once or twice against USC there. Rishi says, thank you, appreciate it. Might try to flip Hawkins and down Bentley, current tight end for like Trigg, Dorian Thomas, or Carter. I think you could pull that off. I think that's very, very reasonable. Dynasty Central Hockey says, thanks. That's how I was leaning, but need a second voice to confirm. Glad I could be that second voice for you. Okay. All right, we got about 4 minutes left here, y'all. So if you got any kind of last minute questions you want to throw in here, if not, I'm totally fine with ending the show a few minutes early tonight. My voice is already a little bit tired. Again, you step away from this for a couple of weeks and suddenly your voice doesn't like that you're talking endlessly for an hour straight. Shocker. But I would say that, glad to be back. Glad, again, I was a little more here and there this week. I gave up after the first question in terms of posting in the chat the polls and everything, because I just couldn't handle all of that tonight. So if you like that, let me know if you want me to bring that back. But if not, I'm actually kind of cool with stopping that moving forward, unless I get somebody else on the show. That way I can plug it in as they're talking. But in terms of when it's just me, I don't think I can do that going forward. Yeah, I think that's really about it. Again, I don't see any last minute questions or anything. You guys have been awesome tonight. Really enjoy talking to y'all. I'm glad. I'm happy with the variety of questions tonight. It wasn't just start sit questions throughout the night. Again, the team building questions were fun. Just talking about news and stuff like that, how we're navigating some injury potential is always fun as well. So like the variety, like what you guys are able to bring tonight. Risha says, thanks again, Jared. Glad you're back. Hope you and your family are doing well. I appreciate y'all. Again, me and my family are working through it. But again, as I keep telling people, things will get better. And given the fact that I'm already back to doing this, I'm feeling pretty good as well as I can after all that, right? But again, doing this helps a lot. It gives me something to distract myself with. So again, you guys are awesome. Really appreciate you guys. And yeah, that will be it for the night. Just one last quick reminder before we get out of here. Yeah, again, if you have not already, make sure you leave a like. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're not already doing so. If you're on podcast listening to this later, make sure you come join us live Tuesday nights. But if you can't do that, just follow the show on podcast. Leave a 5-star review wherever you can. Check out the rest of the Campus Again podcast network for shows ranging on pretty much anything you can think of related to the college fantasy game. And we'll see you guys back here on Monday for another round of waiver wire shows. And then we'll also have, of course, this live show once again next week. Until then, really appreciate all of you guys. And I hope you have a wonderful and blessed week. See y'all.